we were here talking about the fear that if the U.S. and the West and NATO perceived Russia as being unable to essentially quickly occupy and control Ukraine, that there was a danger that there were elements within the West and the U.S. government that they may see this as an opportunity to essentially make Russia an even sort of less significant player on the world stage.
Diminishing them by proxy.
And of course, the problem with this theory is that for the most part, to the extent that they're a player on the world stage, it's only because they have nukes at this point. Their economy is not particularly robust. They have oil. That is also, gives them a certain amount of leverage. But they have nukes.
And they've removed some leverage by sanction-proofing their economy for a little bit of time, anticipating things like this.
And but they have nukes, and those nukes are not going to go away. And even if you were, and so there's a real danger in escalating, and that's where we are, by all accounts at this point. You've got Joe Biden decoupling the $40 billion, 33 of which are military aid for Ukraine, from the domestic COVID bill, which was, remember, like $10 billion. So we're not going to have money for vaccinations, Paxlovid, testing, you name it, because they're so afraid of not getting this money to Ukraine to finish off the Russians that they're willing to basically punt on COVID relief.
He's signing what is being called a modern day Lend-Lease Act, which is essentially
on top of this
too, which is just it removes barriers so that arms can flow more easily into Ukraine at the president's will. This is where we're headed.
Here's Seth Moulton from Massachusetts, Democratic.
Just saying it, though.
I only have 10 seconds left for each of you, if you could. But if they wrap this in the Senate with a Ukraine funding and a COVID funding, you guys okay with that, Congressman Moulton?
Look, I'm going to support it because it's the right thing to do for Ukraine. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of politics involved, and there will be domestic debates here at home about other policies and whatnot. But at the end of the day, we've got to realize we're at war. And we're not just at war to support the Ukrainians. We're fundamentally at war, although it's somewhat through a proxy, with Russia, and it's important that we win.
Congressman Turner?
By proxy. Well, you're not supposed to say that right now. Or at all. You're supposed to just imply it.
We're also not supposed to be at war.
Yeah.
And this is the problem. And it's like, and I can tell it is a dilemma. It is a dilemma because on some level, Ukraine has agency on some level. There was a report, I don't know, a month ago when we saw this shift, right? We saw the shift when we saw Austin say, we're gonna use this to degrade Russia.
Mm-hmm. Weaken Russia, yeah.
Weaken Russia. And we saw the shift happen. And around that time, it was reported that the British Prime Minister met with Zelensky and said, the West is not done yet with this. And at the same time, obviously, Ukraine does not want to be occupied. Ukraine does not want to be invaded. Ukraine does not want to be subject to Russian control. And so there is an amount, it seems to me, that you provide for Ukraine, but that amount should be to get Russia to the negotiations table as soon as possible, not with the added condition that they come there materially weakened.
Yeah.
And unstable.
And Zelensky has admitted that the only way that this is going to end is in some sort of peace talk, not by some prolonged, battle where arms are flowing every which way until Russia meets the weakened threshold, as the Hillary Clinton and Seth Moulton types. have designated, it's met their standards.
And the problem is, too, is that we don't know what a weakened Russia with a weakened Putin who is removed, let's say, what that next iteration of Russia looks like. There is a history in this world of countries that are humiliated by the world, specifically, parts of the West, not having very good outcomes after that. And again, if there was to be frank, if it was like, this is an opportunity for the U.S. to make sure that there are less nuclear weapons in the world. I don't know how that would work, but like magic wand, we can if we take out 10 more, tanks of the Russians and 40 more helicopters, they'll lose all their nukes. Okay. But that's not what's going to happen. What's going to happen is you're going to get a increasingly humiliated and weaker country that is going to have the same ability to do their cyber hacks and their nukes. They're just not going to have anything else. And when those are the two things that you have, those are the two things you're going to rely on. And if you think that in that context, a more reasonable leader of Russia is going to emerge, that's a very odd bet you're making.
We'll get the Ukrainians to punch them in the mouth so hard that they'll come crawling back to us in negotiation. It's silly. And we've seen this fail time and time again. And Moulton even saying that kind of stuff publicly. It's like, when Biden had to walk back his comments about Putin, it's when Lindsey Graham was saying that someone needs to take him out. You can't say this stuff publicly. It really aids Putin's propaganda effort here when he wants to make it about this is the West and NATO, even though this is a war of aggression on Russia's part. This is just his twisted justification. Plus Finland and Sweden right now are considering very NATO. Strongly, mostly, I think likely entering NATO, doing away with that neutrality clause that has been in place for decades at this point. This just helps him drum up nationalism domestically, and that's not what you want.
And leaking that you are involved in providing the intelligence that killed a bunch of Russian generals, I'm not sure what the value of that.
Biden was apparently furious about that in court. Well, I would imagine. Yeah.
I mean, I remember was it Charlie Savage came out with that bounties in Afghanistan story that was like another let's be careful about how we react to this because it seems bad, but what are we going to do with our nukes?
Right.
We start talking about
and that story ended up being false. And all of this stuff is happening. American public. Psh. I mean, look, I am all for people raising money for Ukrainian relief. I am also okay with a certain amount of weaponry going into Ukraine, but they can assess. Let me put it this way. The American government can assess what the dollar figure is that can maintain Ukraine and create a balance of power, or what number of dollar figure that can buy weaponry that could theoretically overwhelm the Russian military. They know, or at least they have ideas.
I mean, they're
not doing this blindly, and
they're probably going to overshoot, but not to use a pun.
Right, but my point being is that this can be calibrated. Our response and our support can be calibrated, and we know this because we've actually seen a difference. If you go back at the beginning of the invasion, there's a difference. There is a difference, and you can even hear it in the political rhetoric. So.
Yeah, they just work in coordination with Ukraine. Don't listen to, part of that, what was so unsettling about that Hillary Clinton Maddow appearance was because she was clearly trying to drum up public support for this kind of strategy. And Seth Moulton's the exact kind of guy who would be pushing this behind the scenes. So,
yep. I mean, the American public basically didn't pay attention to the Iraq War starting, somewhere around 2005 or 6, and They have no trouble ignoring our involvement in this.
That combined with that, we're just putting COVID stuff on the back burner so we can funnel more, just scoop more money out the door is just insane to me.
Insane. We don't want to jeopardize this money.
Well, yeah, because decoupling bills worked so well during the first part of the Biden presidency. Let's try it again.
And it's just crazy to me that Politico seems to have reported that it was Biden himself or the Biden administration's call to decouple the COVID funding. Like, it wasn't even like Pelosi or whoever was clamoring. Biden himself was like separated.
Yeah, let's do this. We want this money out there. Jen says Russia's humiliated themselves, not the rest of the world. I mean, whatever. Whatever. It's not a question of I don't know. I just think that is the level of argument you would make if we were, on the playground and literally on the playground. Like, that's not the point. Like, I don't know. I guess Germany in 1917 also humiliated themselves.
Really humiliated.
And that none of what, the way that the world ended that conflict did to humiliate them. I mean, okay, if you want to live with that reality, that's fine. But you also got to live with the reality that follows. Okay? This is not a question of who's bad, who's good. This is a question of how much killing and destruction do you want now and in the future? The answer should be whatever the less amount possible could be.